Okay, thanks a lot for having me, and hi everybody. I'm going to try to jump right in here to the question of phenomenological method and Heidegger in Tanabe's early texts. So normally I like to write out a whole text, but got some time constraints. Got to hand in my thesis next week, so I've done it in a PowerPoint fashion this time with notes and some quotes, and I'll try to talk pretty freely about this problem. So the main issue when dealing with the first reception of Heidegger in Japan is that the first text on Heidegger in Japanese, namely Tanabe's article from 1924, titled "A New Turn in Phenomenology," Heidegger's Phenomenology of Life, is read in a completely abstract fashion. Since Tanabe's early philosophy, everything that comes before what's called Tanabe Tetsugaku, which starts in the 30s, is left to darkness by the commentators. So we can look at, I have here 3 examples to start with of, can I really see this screen, excuse me. Let me do this. Oh, sorry. Right. So first one, Fujita Masakatsu's recent history of Japanese philosophy, right? Has very few lines on the early Tanabe. He writes, in the very starting point of his thinking, Tanabe Hajime was greatly influenced by Nishida Kitaro. It is clear from the account that we find in his first article on Thetic judgment, according to which all knowledge is a foundation of a pure and unitary experience devoid of any distinction between the things and the I. Also, he writes, but at the same time, so this is, at the same time, Heidegger here, that is in a new turn to in phenomenology, Heidegger's phenomenology of life, also expresses his view that, Tanabe here expresses his view that Husserl's phenomenology does not fully satisfy his philosophical demand. On the one hand, Tanabe, of course, recognizes the original spirit of phenomenology, recognizes the original spirit of phenomenology consists in its refraining from abstraction and emphasizing concrete facticity, and he has strong sympathy for this kind of phenomenological approach. But on the other hand, he also holds that Husserl's phenomenology does not yet reach the complete concreteness demanded by philosophy of life. So there are 2 things I want to stress here. First of all, that once we see Jinsui Keiken in a text, there is a knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, this is Nishida. And second, the need for concreteness, for concreteness is often stressed by the commentators, but what does this mean? And that we find greater concreteness in Heidegger than in Husserl? How is that to be understood? Is there something like a concreteness earlier in Tanabe's philosophy? Another example, Yusao Yuasa writes, Tanabe Hajime went to University of Freiburg in 2022 and studied under Husserl and Heidegger. Since at this time, his interests were in the epistemology of mathematical and natural science. He was strongly influenced by Kant's philosophy, and his influence from Heidegger is relatively small. So the idea is that Tanabe, before meeting Heidegger, was interested mainly in mathematics, natural sciences, no interest or little in history. And so Heidegger's philosophy has this newness to it, right? That all of a sudden there's an emphasis on history. Third example, Mini Hideki. After his stay in Berlin, Tanabe studied at the University of Freiburg in order to delve into Husserl's phenomenology. Here he met the young and as of yet unknown Privatdozent Heidegger. It seems that attending Heidegger's lectures, Tanabe was deeply impressed by him. The lectures in question were those of the summer semester of 1923 on ontology, hermeneutics, affecticity that Fernando also talked about a second ago. After his return to Japan, Tanabe immediately wrote the article A New Turn in Phenomenology and thus introduced Heidegger to Japan at a very early date. This article criticizes Husserl's transcendental phenomenology, which is based on pure consciousness, and clarifies Heidegger's new attempt, which pursues the possibility of a hermeneutic phenomenology that takes the standpoint of factual life. And this is in a book titled Heidegger to Nihon no Tetsugaku, so Heidegger and Japanese philosophy. These are the only lines on this article in the book, and yet this is the first article written about Heidegger in Japan. Can it really be summarized that shortly? What is at stake here? So, seeing this, we can talk about some general tendencies in interpretation in Heidegger, the Tanabe scholarship relating to his early period. First, as I said before, Jinsui Keigen is assumed to be a Nishidian concept. Second, Tanabe's philosophy is taken to start with his overt critique of Nishida, so that's 1930. And we'll leave everything before that aside, or just summarize a few topics. Third, Tanabe is interested in natural sciences and is thus influenced mainly by the Marburg school. And fourth, due to all these facts, Tanabe's first article on Heidegger from 24 is read mainly as a historical document. What can we learn about Heidegger's early philosophy from when reading this document? It's never read as a philosophical production in its own right. So if we are interested in how Heidegger is received here, I think that we need to recontextualize this article and thus, how should I say, turn to the philosophy that Tanabe works out in the 14 years preceding this, because Tanabe starts writing in or publishing his writings at least in 1910, and so he already has a pretty developed philosophical standpoint by the time that he starts writing about Heidegger. So what place does phenomenology hold in this early thought of Tanabe? And what does concreteness, since it's always stressed that Husserl is not sufficiently concrete, Heidegger is more concrete. What does this mean, and how does the phenomenological method relate to this concreteness? Let's turn back then to the very starting point of Tanabe's philosophy, Sotehanlan ni tsuite, on judgment. So is Jinsui Keiken a Nishidian concept? Of course, Nishida writes about Jinsui Keiken, but he's not the only one to talk about pure experience. There are other contemporary thinkers where you find, of course, the concept of pure experience. And it's not only James. Tanabe, for instance, talks about, quotes Volkelt, Johannes Volkelt, where the second, in his Erfahrung Denken, the second second section is die reine Erfahrung als Erkenntnisprinzip. Pure experience as a principle of knowledge, or cognition as it's sometimes translated. But we say that if we examine the theoretical framework of Tanabe's early theory of knowledge, it's rather Theodor Lipps that's taken over, and actually he writes a short article at the very same time as he writes on faith judgment. He writes an article on Theodor Lipps, and it can be shown line by line very clearly and easily how it's all taken, well, it's not all, but it's a modification of Theodor Lips's theory of knowledge. And so if you compare Tanabe's theory as it's set forth in this article with Lips's theory of knowledge, it's easy to see that Jinsei Keiken corresponds to Erlebnis in Lips's philosophy. And Lips also talks about the unity of subject and object. I've talked about this on different occasions before this, and I can't go into the details here. That would take half of my time. But in short, Tanabe only talks about Jinsei Keiken in 1910 and leaves it aside afterwards for Chokusetsu Keiken, just like Nishida does, until 1915. And then, well, it's not that he doesn't mention Taiken before that. In 1913, we find that. But from 1915, 1916 onward, Taiken comes in the place of Jinsei Keiken, in the place of Chokusetsu Keiken. You often find in later texts when he refers to ideas that he has worked out before those dates, where he talked about Jinsei Keiken, Chokusetsu Keiken. Now he reformulates, but just puts in Taiken instead. So Taiken is Jinsei Keiken. Taiken is Chokusetsu Keiken. These are just, we could say, early attempts at rendering the same idea of Erlebnis. Okay. This also means that translating Taiken as experience, and without distinguishing it from Keiken, as often happens, leads us to conceptual confusions that are very problematic, since a lot of Tanabe's approach consists in dividing the conceptual levels. Taiken is not mediated by thinking. That's why it's pure experience, right? That's why it's pure. Whereas experience, Keiken, is mediated by thinking and thus takes an object, right? The object is posited. So yeah, the original unity of subject and object, an act of content in pure experience, Erlebnis, is through Lips. He takes over. Lips is in the line of Brentano here, right? Of Brentano's idea of intentionality. So it's the intentional inexistence of the object is rethought as pure experience or Taiken. But how is the object then in potency, basically, in the act? Well, as a task. Tanabe tries to synthesize, excuse me, Brentano's school with the neo-conscience. So to overcome the formalism of neo-conscience, he draws on the idea of Erlebnis from Lips, from Brentano, and later on from Husserl, and also from Bergson. So first, the object is potency as Aufgabe. Gegebenheit or gegeben sein is aufgegeben sein. It's an Aufgabe. Or in Lips's terms, it's a Forderung. Or Rickert sollen. The correlate to this sollen is an acknowledgement which posits as judgment the object. So the judgment here, Handan, Urteil, of course, understood also in the perhaps etymological sense of original or primordial split, right? Splitting the original unity of the object and subject, content and act, thus positing the object as something that is as a Gegenstand, right? Something that opposes us in a Gegenstehen. He gradually then will, from 1915 and onwards, give us a dialectical spin to this idea, that we first have a unity that is split in the judgment, and then truth is the return to the original unity, the unity of act and content. So we go through an sich, für sich, and an und für sich, right? So return to the origin. The reason why I want to stress this is that the return to the origin, if I may anticipate a bit what I'm driving at, the return to the origin is thus what consciousness as such strives to do, and it mirrors also, and this process is also mirrored in the phenomenological method as such, right? The phenomenological method tries to clarify the original origin, the original unity of subject and object. So I said before, synthesis spontaneo and new conscience. So rather than in the new conscience framework, right, we have with Cohen the idea of pure thought, pure thinking, that is the origin that passes the world. And Tanabe then says, rather than pure thinking, it's pure experience. So he's trying to give concreteness to the formality of the new conscious framework in this sense, to rethink pure thinking as pure experience, to rethink the origin as Erlebnis. We could say in this sense that what he's trying to do is to draw on phenomenology, draw on not only Husserlian phenomenology, but on the phenomenological school for something like a rigorous science that is sciences that are founded in intuition. Whereas in the new Kantian framework, this intuition falls outside of the framework. So he writes in 1915, the incomplete theory set forth in this book takes a perspective which, restructuring and developing Kant's transcendental theory, by means of phenomenology, gives a foundation of intuition or lived experience, again, to logicism, and which, contrariwise to a mere idealism of value, discovers a foundation of reality. Right, the idealism of value here is perhaps rather Heidelberg's, right? It's Rickert that he has in mind, that Fernando also referred to him a second ago. So the search for concreteness in the early text is this intuitive foundation for the sciences against the formalism of new Kantian logic. Right, yet it keeps the idea of a primacy of the ought, in the sense that, as we said before, the positing of the object is an Urteil, it's a judgment, which is the acknowledgement of the ought, in which passes the object as being. So being is in this sense subordinate to the givenness of the ought in lived experience. Right. And this idea is taken over from both Lips and from Rickert, rather than from the Marburg school. So drawing mainly on the Heidelberg school, drawing mainly on Rickert, Tanabe does not actually give primacy to nature and natural science. Rather, cultural sciences or sciences of spirit are better suited to accessing this fundamental givenness that he's trying to clarify. He writes, the elements of nature are constituted simply in external relations from immediate experience, leaving values aside. So there's an abstraction, okay, in the constitution of nature. The elements of cultural phenomena, on the other hand, are concretely constituted, preserving the values that are proper to immediate experience. In this sense, cultural phenomena are thus closer to immediate experience than nature, and one thus retrospects immediate experience in a more immediate manner from the point of view of cultural content than from natural phenomena. So what I want to show with this is, first and foremost, we need to do away with this idea that Tanabe, when he goes to Germany, is under the sway mainly of the Marburg school, and that he's focused on natural sciences. No, he already has the idea that phenomenology needs to go through rather the cultural world. The cultural world is more apt for as a guide for concrete phenomenology. How then do we access this Erlebnis, this pure experience? Well, in Sote Handanitsite, in his very first article on Thetic judgment, things seem to be very unproblematic, in the sense that Tanabe gives this example of how lying in a field on a spring day, the thoughts fall away, and now we're in pure experience. Everything is fine. But things aren't that simple when we get to the second half of the 1910s. That's how he explains in 1918 the phenomenological method. How does the true form, this is a difficult term to translate, right? Shinsou, of intuition then become a knowing. This is, well, difficult to translate Chishiki, because we need to distinguish it, as he clearly states here, from Ninshiki. Ninshiki is Erkenntnis. So I translate the first one as knowing and the second one as knowledge. Either way, intuition here is synonymous with Erlebnis, more or less. Intuition and Erlebnis are go hand in hand. How does the true form of intuition then become a knowing? I hear speak of knowing. If I hear speak of knowing, it is due to the necessity of distinguishing this modality of consciousness from ordinary knowledge. The only path open to us consists in provisionally leaving aside the particular positions from which we abstract, unify, and fix through thinking the inner relations of intuition, thus giving rise to knowledge, and concretely retrospecting the inner relations of intuition, which are the foundation and the background of these positions. These particular positions, where we constitute, right, the objective worlds of nature and of culture. That's the idea, and this is the this would correspond to the natural attitude, right? The neutralization of the natural attitude. How do we then return into this to Erlebnis in order to clarify it, to clarify what is at the foundation of the natural attitude which posits the world. Even the true form of intuition thus becomes indirectly a knowing by going through ordinary knowledge. And it can thus be expressed by means of the productions of thinking, the concepts. The science which in this perspective seeks the inner relations of intuition by tracing back ordinary knowledge in inverse direction is phenomenologie, or transcendental psychology, Transzendentalpsychologie. Of course, Husserl himself criticizes transcendental psychology, but Tanabe argues that phenomenology needs to be understood as transcendental psychology, and a concept that he takes from Rickert, but reinterprets as the Natopian reconstructive subjectivation that is set forth in Natop's 1912 book on general psychology. Right. But yeah, we again see here the inner relations that were mentioned in the previous quote. I believe, right, no students. Perhaps not. In any case, yeah, the idea is that these inner relations are what are abstracted when constituting nature. Time master, are you?
No,
you look worried.
are you sure that Nishiki means ordinary knowledge? Because at least in the same time, Nishida probably would use Nishiki in the sense of epistemological knowledge.
Well, Nishiki is, well, yeah.
So it's not a critic to the, because it's writing about phenomenology against the epistemology in the ordinary sense. So it means new Kantian sense. It's not.
Nishiki is erkenntnis, and chishiki is consistently used in Tanabe in order to talk about the type of knowledge that is, okay, so Nishiki first and foremost, translating erkenntnis in English is problematic, right? Sometimes it's translated as knowledge, sometimes it's translated as cognition. I prefer talking about knowledge because cognition to me seems to be too encompassing. That means any kind of cognitive acts, it would seem. Erkenntnis corresponds in a certain sense more directly to knowledge. So that's why but futsu no ninshiki, so futsu no ninshiki is...
Futsu no, what is the meaning of futsu in this sense?
Yes, well, it's generally speaking, it's the knowledge of the objects in the world, and here the chishiki, it's in comparison to chishiki that it's not futsu, right? The chishiki is the phenomenological knowledge, is the return then to the origin, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is how the futsu no is to be understood here. Basically, the perception, when he talks about ninshiki, it's rather perception of the objects, right?
So based on a subject object distinction.
Absolutely. Ninshiki is always in an object subject distinction. Yeah, it arises from the handan. It arises from the judgment.
Right. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for letting me clarify that. Okay, then what is the sache? The matter under scrutiny and phenomenology according to Tanabe. It is then these inner relations mentioned here, right? The inner relations of intuition or of lived experience, which are abstracted when constituting nature and which are kept more, are conserved in a more, well, are better conserved, we could say, in culture. What then are these interrelations? So that's a thorny problem in Tanabe, and he draws on many, well, mainly on two sources to deal with them. Pure duration on the one hand, so basically the idea that the totality or of this, how should I say, this series of phases is immanent in each moment of time, right? And second, the essences in the Husserlian sense. This is mainly in his text on Leibniz, the meaning of Leibniz's philosophy. Leibniz Tetsugaku no Igi from 1918 is where he first deals with the Husserlian essences in a clear manner, although the topic is broached already in 1916 in his work on his article on the universal. Nitsuite is already a take on the intuitive givenness of the universal, the intuitive givenness of the essences. So it's an a priori that is intuitively given and is not logically derived. So it's in this sense irrational. It's a material and not a formal a priori. How do we study these in the relations? Intentionality as the guide to studying. Well, we could say that when he here talks about how we need to go through ordinary knowledge the idea is that we don't just do away with the relation to the object. We can't just come back to this primordial unity without going through our being directed towards an object. Rather, we need to perhaps bracket, and that's the thing with the phenomenological epoche, that it brackets, it doesn't negate the world. So it's preserved but neutralized. And we can thus go to the noetic through the nomadic, we could say, right? And this to him is the only way that we can guarantee a scientific standpoint when investigating the Erlebnis. Not a merely intuitive access to lived experience. This becomes very clear. For example, in this text from 1918, I think I'll skip the first part and read the bottom quote. The simple intuition of the absolute, which precedes the separation of subject and object, or the opposition of spirit and nature, does not constitute a philosophy. Philosophy must always be conceptual knowledge. But simple intuition is not knowledge. Such an intuition pertains to the fields of art and religion, but it cannot be called philosophy. So mere intuition is not philosophy. This echoes Rickert, Der Gegenstand der Erkenntnis, his third edition from 1915. Sorry, I didn't get to translate this. The main idea is that we can live through, so erleben, the unity of Sein und Sinn, the unity of being and meaning. But once we talk about this Erlebnis, it is in a theoretical framework. We have to break it up. It needs to split. There's always in a theoretical framework a split between subject and object, between being and meaning. Wir erkennen und werden dabei urteilen der Wahrheit inne, indem wir das Sollen der Zusammengehörigkeit von Form und Inhalt bejahen. Da haben wir die Einheit von Sein und Sinn unmittelbar. Da erleben wir sie. Aber freilich, schon indem wir konstatieren, dass wir es sind, die sie haben und erleben, oder dass das Subjekt den Gegenstand erfasst, müssen wir die unmittelbar erlebte Einheit zerstören. So we must break apart the immediately lived through, the unity that is immediately lived through. Das heißt, sie in einen wirklichen Erkenntnisakt des Subjekts und dessen nicht wirkliche Gegenständlichkeit spalten. Wir dürfen daher nicht einmal sagen, dass die Einheit, die wir erleben, ist. Yes, we can't even say that this unity that we live through is, denn das wäre ja ihr Erkenntnis als Einheit, because that would be in the framework of knowledge already, right? There would be knowing it as unity. To say that it is to already be in knowledge. Und die kann es nicht geben. Die Einheit selbst lässt sich nie theoretisch mit Begriffen denken, sondern eben nur atheoretisch erleben. This unity can only be lived through in an atheoretical manner. Ja, schon indem wir sagen, dass wir sie erleben, zerstören wir sie. Denn wir benennen sie mit einem Wort, das eine theoretische Bedeutung hat, und bringen sie dadurch unter einen Begriff. Because through this use of words, we bring it under a concept. Diese Spaltung gehört zum Wesen jeder Theorie. So in all theory of knowledge, right, we need to, we are within this framework of the split already. Insofern ist aller Monismus und alle Identitätsphilosophie auch in der Erkenntnistheorie ein Irrweg. Wollen wir über den Dualismus hinaus, So müssen wir die theoretische Kontemplation und die Wissenschaft gänzlich verlassen und es mit der ästhetischen Kontemplation und in der Kunst oder der, excuse me, I gotta something away here on the computer to see it, mit der ästhetischen Kontemplation und der Kunst in der Kunst oder mit der mystischen Kontemplation in der Religion versuchen, right? So if we want to go beyond this dualism, then we have to leave aside the theoretical contemplation of science and try to grasp it in an aesthetic contemplation in art or with a mystic contemplation in religion, but without any hope of dealing with it in a logical manner. Doch ohne Hoffnung, dass in diesen Gebieten Geschaute oder Erlebte jemals auf einen logisch restlos verständlichen Ausdruck zu bringen. Okay, so we can see here this how Tanabe in the same way said this pertains to art and religion, but cannot be called philosophy. So Tanabe here remains within the limits of philosophy as defined by Pickett. Central challenge is accessing Erlebnis or life, we could say as well, as it precedes knowledge while maintaining scientific rigor and thus staying in a position that does not leave knowledge aside. So we have two poles: the material concreteness devoid of form, that comes from then the philosophies of Erlebnis, against the formal rigor devoid of content, which it takes over then from neo-consciousness. He tries to unify the two. So in a certain sense, he's already trying to unify philosophy of science and philosophy of life through phenomenology. And this will be the central topic of his 1924 article on Heidegger, is to say, in Husserl, there is no real unification of philosophy of science, philosophy of life. There's no way of thinking the unity of form and content, but this can be done in Heidegger. And we see that already before this is his main concern. This is Tanabe's main concern. How can we work out a philosophical method, a phenomenological method that is both rigorous and guarantees material concreteness at the same time? So this, in this sense, also, but this also prefigures the later critique of Nishida. How do we safeguard philosophy against falling into religion? And phenomenology, as we can see, provides the key insofar as it takes intentionality as its guiding idea. In 1920, Tanabe then goes further in his understanding of the phenomenological method. What we saw before was that it's difficult to access, right, this unity. We need to, in order to stay scientific, we need to stay in the dualistic framework in a certain sense. But here in 1920, he'll say, okay, phenomenology can reach this dualistic framework of the act and the content in the discernment of essences. But beneath this dualistic framework of the essence of act, the essence of content, there is an original fact, something that can never be discerned as an essence. And this is the Tathandlung. Tathandlung, which is also the unity of act and content. Let's see what he says. But one may wonder if, despite Husserl's recognition of this pure I, he does not persist in considering it as an essence. We can, however, consider that no matter how we proceed, this pure I cannot be discerned as an essence, and that it is merely the limit of what Nakai calls subjectivation. What I call consciousness in general is, in its Ansicht stage, only what takes this pure consciousness, this pure I, as the foundation of unity. We thus cannot say that transcendental psychology, which takes this consciousness in general as a guiding idea, is only a science of essences. If we in this perspective take it to be a factual science, then the fact with which it deals is not one that is founded on essences. It is a primordial fact, which is the foundation due to which the essences are correlated as the side of intentional content and the side of quality of the act, and which makes phenomenology, understood as a science of essences, the science of consciousness in a certain sense. In my view, the proper role of phenomenology can thus only reveal itself by means of transcendental psychology, which strives to elucidate consciousness through subjectivation and reconstruction. So the idea of the transcendental psychology, it seems here, is that it goes beyond the eidetic reduction. It's a radicalization of the transcendental reduction, we could say, against the eidetic reduction in order to access this primordial unity of Erlebnis or of pure experience, if you will. Okay, yeah. So I would have liked to have some quotes here to make it clearer, but we're gonna have to make do this time for now with just these notes. Turning then to the new turn in phenomenology, Heidegger's Phenomenology of Life from 1924. The question of unifying philosophy of science and philosophy of life, that is rigor and concreteness, form and matter, is at the center of this article, as I said before. The points of critique against Husserl are the following. First, Husserl falls on the side of philosophy of science. Right? Husserl is a path. It is indeed a step forward against towards this unification of philosophy of science and philosophy of life. However, Husserl, to Tanabe's mind, is too influenced by mathematics to really effectuate this unification. He stays within the framework of philosophy of science. And this is where he takes his idea of the essences from. The essences, as we know, the eidetic variation is how you liberate, we say, the essences from the facts. And so there is to Tanabe a break from reality, a break from actuality, if you will, genjitsu. Once we in the phenomenological method as conceived by Husserl. The eidetic reduction requires a break from reality. Now, the phenomenological study of consciousness takes an external viewpoint, furthermore, on the consciousness that it studies. In the Heideggerian philosophy, in the hermeneutic phenomenology of life that Tanabe is witness to, or what we want to say, in 1923, and that he presents here in this paper. On the other hand, it's not an external viewpoint. There's a radicalization in the same way of the transcendental reduction against the eidetic reduction to the unity of act and content, subject and object, and this goes hand in hand with this and not an external viewpoint but an internal viewpoint. And here I want to go back to what I said much earlier in this talk about how the development of consciousness itself goes from an original unity through a split back to the original unity in the an sich für sich, that is truth, right? Now, this is so the development of consciousness is itself a return to this unity. And so there's sorry, I'm trying to find a way to formulate this. the way that Heidegger overcomes this split between philosophy of life and philosophy of science is by saying that philosophy, indeed phenomenology, is a realization of life itself. In the same way that this developed, it is the phenomenological method is one with the development of consciousness itself. The Selbstauslegung of consciousness or of the Dasein gives the key to this to the new method in phenomenology of the hermeneutic phenomenology that so it's not that that phenomenology now studies consciousness from the outside in an object-subject split in a certain sense, but rather that it is seen as the development of consciousness itself. How can I put this more clearly? It's interesting in this when reading this article to see how Tanabe synthesizes Heidegger with Nishida in a certain sense and gives a place to the inscription of the subject, the individual subject, in the development of reality itself through jikaku, so self-awareness. Right? Self-awareness is this process through which consciousness goes from this original unity through the split towards the original unity again. And he conceives this jikaku as the development of the Genjitsu in Heidegger's philosophy, talking about Dasein as Genjitsu Sanzai. So the Genjitsu Sanzai is here in this translation, in this first article of Dasein. Rather than focusing on Da as the openness to being, it's the inscription in being. And this inscription in being because it's not it's difficult things to try to explain. Sorry. Well, the main point that I'm trying to get across, and that I hope to get across better in the next time we meet, if I'm going to talk about something like this, is that the phenomenological method is now grounded in life itself, rather than so Tanabe has all the time been trying to say, how can we unify the rigor of a philosophy of science with the concreteness of a philosophy of life? And now there's a new concept of philosophical rigor in Heidegger. Rather than trying to understand rigor arbitrarily from the standpoint of mathematics or from philosophy of science, he'll rather say there is a rigor of life itself. There is a rigor of the concreteness of the development of life itself. Thinking from the standpoint of the intuitively given, thinking from the standpoint of the Erlebnis itself, is to think from the standpoint of life. And life is this process of Auslegung. That is where there's a new key in a certain sense for rethinking the reduction from within life and not from the outside towards life, say in a certain sense. Yeah, I don't know to what degree that became clear. I apologize for that.
It's clear. Don't worry.
Do you really want to put a question?
牧野は2時に閉まるので、行かなきゃなんですけど、I have a factual question.
Yeah, no question.
I just wanted to ask.
Skip lunch.
I'm sorry, I took way too long.
Yeah, the Ecole was published in 1913.
Yes.
Right, and where everything is sort of laid out, right? And then I just wondered how much Tanabe read or referenced Ecole.
Yes. Right. So the first time that he that he writes on Husserl in any length in his Verhältnissuite that he does.
Ideen specifically.
Not there. He's rather focusing on logische Untersuchungen.
Nee, then it doesn't really count. But Ideen is that's what's in Ideen, right? So I wondered. I mean, that's shown 1913.
No, I'm saying in 16. In
1916, right?
In 16.
He reads.
Yes, that's logische Untersuchungen. There is, however, he doesn't reference Ideen there. But there is a sentence that is a quote from Ideen. So he has some kind of knowledge of Ideen, but it isn't referenced there.
And also
then 1918, sorry.
Yeah.
1918, it's clear there that maybe even in 17. I think that in 17, his Jikanlong, I believe that there is.
But because, for example, Nishida in Jikaku ni okeru Chokanto he quoted Ideen.
Yeah, is this known, right? And then also from 1919, Husserl had a series of critique of a recap.
Yeah.
That's kind of similar, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that was referenced or known to Tanabe at the time. But it's around the same time.
Yes,
That is-
1919.
Yeah.
I wonder about that.
Recap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Husserl.
In its lecture series, I think it went several years, and then Husserl went through this. I mean, on a similar point.
Right. Well, yeah.
If
The references, the Husserl references in Tanabe are philosophy as rigorous science, the logische Untersuchungen and Ideen. Right.
Yeah.
That's mainly.
But Husserl is much more like this after 1915, it's
Mhm.
right? So that would have been the reference. But anyway, sorry. You have to watch the time. Any more questions?
Rex, please put your question.
Here the questions.
I'll be quick so people can go to lunch. The description of, this Heideggerian phenomenology that you were talking about at the end of the paper sounds a lot like Heidegger's notion of formal indication to me. I was just curious if you see Heidegger's conception of formal indication, formale Anzeige. And I was curious if you see I haven't read the Tanabe piece that you're talking about. So do you see do you see a similar resemblance there?
So I'm not sure that I understood you correctly. Formal education?
Formale Anzeige.
Formale Anzeige.
Formale Anzeige. I'm sorry, no, I would have to give that more thought. I can't.
Okay. Yeah, well, you might look into that because that's the way Heidegger was conceiving phenomenology at the time, and it sounds very similar to what you're talking about. So
Okay, thank you.
So thank you, and sorry we have to run.
No, I'm sorry. I'm the one who should have been mindful of the time.
Stop here the morning session. So thank you very much, Morten. At 3:30 in the Japanese afternoon.
Right, my talk will have that as a framework, so.
Okay, we can
Yeah.
continue.
You can go. Yeah.
Okay. So since I wasn't allowed to ask my question, I'll just put it out even more bluntly than a question. Your interpretation of the passion.